Afternoon. My name is Jim Conlan, and welcome to our Global Politics Show. As we know, in our Global Politics Show each week, we look at international situations around the world and the current sort of effect it can have here for us in Ireland and more particularly the European Union. And up for discussion this week, we're very much focused on the growing escalating crisis in the Middle East and the growing tensions and the conflict between Iran and Israel. And we're delighted today to be joined by a Middle East expert and Iran analyst, a senior foreign policy advisor, Reza Khanzadeh, based in America at the moment, to give his expert views and opinions on what is going on at the moment in our present time. Reza, if I can start off, sir, thanks for joining us today. If I can start off, sir, by asking you, is the conflict we're going on at the moment? We heard Israel say that this was a strategic military tactic to take away the nuclear capabilities of Iran arming themselves. But really and truly, is this a ploy or a tactic or a conflict to really initiate regime change in Iran?
Yeah. Great question. And thanks for having me. It is an honor. The so there's a bit of complexity in history in order to answer that question, you know, uh, to a certain extent. But the short answer is yes, because Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, he has essentially been obsessed with Iran since his political career started in the mid to late 90s. And he has focused on Iran as an existential threat, rightly or wrongly. You can make a strong argument either way, uh, especially with the type of rhetoric coming out of the Islamic Republic about, death to Israel and also death to America, and also certain comments about wanting to wipe Israel off of the, map, so to speak. Um, so while there was this pretext of wanting to destroy, to put it very simply, to destroy Israel's nuclear capabilities, there was always this vision, this long-term vision for Netanyahu for some type of, regime change, or as one of my colleagues puts it, Trita Parsi puts this very well, regime collapse. Because for Netanyahu, chaos in Iran is much more valuable to him than whether it's a peaceful Iran that wants to have better relationship with Israel or a volatile Iran that does not want to have. Because either way, Iranians, no matter what the government is, no matter who is in charge, there is this vision inside Iran that a nuclear program is in the best interest of the country, specifically civilian, because modern history, Iran has been plagued with a vast series of um, issues when it comes to, water supply and electricity and, things of that nature. So having a civilian nuclear program is obviously something that the entire country really does support. Um, so for Netanyahu, regime change is at the top of his priority list when it comes to these conflicts that they're having with Iran currently. How that's going to play out still does remain to be seen, because we are waiting. Just this morning, uh, President Trump put out a statement saying that he's going to wait within the next 2 weeks to
Yeah.
see whether or not to join Israel in these attacks. And in those 2 weeks, anything could happen. Literally anything could happen between Iran and Israel. And we have Iran's foreign minister Abbas Araghchi heading over to Geneva, I think, to meet with his European counterparts to discuss some type of diplomatic off-ramp to this conflict. And even these past couple of days, because this conflict started in uh, depending on where you are in the world, it started either Thursday night or Friday morning, and we're on to day 7, day 8, and every day that goes by, we've seen this decrease in the number of missiles Iran is sending into Israel, which in some parts signifies their willingness to want to find an off-ramp. Because at the end of the day, what's most important to the Islamic Republic is the Islamic Republic. When their back is against the wall, or if they are stuck between two very difficult decisions, whether to continue this conflict with Israel or to safeguard their own existence as the ruling government of this country, they're always going to side with their own existence. So seeing this type of decrease in Iran's attacks towards Israel shows to me that they are more interested in saving themselves and wanting this conflict to end, because they're also sending signals to President Trump that they still want to have some kind of negotiation, even without actually having these meetings. I think it's tomorrow with his European counterparts. Shows that there is this threat from Israel that uh, that Netanyahu is essentially hell bent on doing some type of regime change or regime collapse, uh, because, like I said, it's been almost 30 years, and that's been the drum that he's been beating. That Netanyahu, and every few years, every 5 years, he has these speeches where he says Iran is 1 or 2 years away from a nuclear bomb, and it's been 30 years, and that hasn't materialized. Even Washington's own intelligence, agencies are saying that Iran is 3 years away from actually having a nuclear bomb that they can launch, wherever. Uh, but Trump is the type of president where he wasn't raised in the political diplomatic, arena. He was raised in the, real estate arena. So his approach to this is not that of a seasoned veteran within, diplomacy and international relations, and especially the way Europe views these types of conflicts. Prior presidents were very much privy to the EU and NATO and the way Europe sees the Middle East and also sees the world, and they were um, very, very conscious of that. Trump is not at all. Even when he ran for, to be president, this is no secret, it was always America first for him, and particularly American businesses came first as well. And that's part of the reason why I believe he backed out of the JCPOA during his first term, because he saw that Europeans were in a much better position to benefit from that deal than America. Um, so now we just have to wait and see, what happens in these next 2 weeks.
Reza, you mentioned the opinion of the Iranian people be very much behind the sort of the nuclear sort of program being run at the moment in their country. What is the Iranian people's view on the ground in terms of the world reaction, in terms of support for Iran? Because at the moment, Europe is sort of holding peace in the background. It looks like America and Donald Trump is weighed in behind Israel, but we don't see the likes of the traditional powers that Iran have been associated in the past. China are keeping quiet. Russia are not really getting too much involved the way Iran are hoping they would have been. We know the proxies have been practically decimated in the last year or two, in terms of that would have given that sort of guerrilla type force to Iran. So, what is the Iran public and the civilization? Do they feel they're very much isolated? Do they feel that they're very much on their own, that no one is going to, if the escalation increases, that no one is going to come in and aid them, dare I say? Have they any allies with nearby that is going to come to their backing?
Yeah, I think you described it almost perfectly. The Iranian people, and I was the last time I went to Iran was right before COVID in 2019, and I've gone there every year, and I have um, an ex a very extensive network, in Iran. So even though it's been 6 years since I've been there, I still keep in touch with my contacts there, and I follow the news obviously in Farsi, and um, it's it's a it's a country with 90 million people. So clearly, it's very difficult to make a comment about what they're going through in general terms, because there's a certain percentage that still supports the regime, and they very much support this war or this conflict. If I had to put a number on that percentage, I think it would be at 20% at the most, but definitely less. So the vast majority of the country does not support this regime, and they definitely do not support this conflict. But there's a caveat there, or I should say, like a like a um, kind of like a side note where there is a strong percentage of Iranians who do is a difficult word to find, but I think they do appreciate what Israel is doing in the sense that they don't like this government. The vast majority of Iranians hate this government and don't want it to exist in the shape and form that it exists now. Now, whether they want, complete regime change or whether they or if they want a complete or some type of like serious, reform within the regime, those debates will continue to go on. But one thing that most Iranians can agree on is that um, almost most Iranians, inside Iran can agree on is that they do not like this government. They do not want this government. And I remember those first couple days when, Israel was, bombing key sites in Iran, nuclear sites, military sites. A lot of the Iranians were actually cheering. They were pretty excited. But then once the attacks were hitting civilians and children and women were dying, that's when it turned to this duplicitous type of reaction where on the one hand they do appreciate that their government is being hit the way they are, but they're angry that their country is being hit the way it is. And to your latter point about them feeling isolated, I think that's very much the case. Um, Russia is clearly not going to come support Iran. The same thing for China. Those two countries serves them, when it serves their interests, when it's into their benefit. But the relationship between Russia and Iran or China and Iran does not compare to the relationship between the United States and Israel. There is a religious element to that relationship between Israel and America. And there's also a political element because Israel has AIPAC in Washington, D.C., which is a strong lobbying arm that really pushes American politicians, congressmen, senators to side with Israel unconditionally, almost a blind type of support because of the level of money and power that's behind AIPAC to almost the political, death of a politician. If they don't side with AIPAC or Israel, they could not get reelected or they won't have enough money to run for reelection. So that's an element that exists in America that kind of binds America to Israel. But those types of relationships don't exist between Russia and Iran or China and Iran. Iran has no stronghold. They have no way of pushing Russia to help them or pushing China to help them. So that is to the detriment of the Iranian people to where they really do feel like they are on their own because their own government is not right now. Um, they're not really focused. The Iran's government is not focused on helping its people. Right now they're focused on uh, this war with Israel and also finding all the operatives, all of the sleeper agents, if you will, all of the moles, all of the double agents that are inside Iran helping Israel, particularly through Israel's um, you know um, intelligence, Mossad, and now they're using that to arrest people that are, uprising against the regime. And they're just coding it in this narrative that, oh, these aren't, people that are protesting the regime. These are people from Israel. These are people from Mossad that are here to, overthrow us. And there's been footage of that from, regular Iranians inside Iran showing that, they would give stories of how my son or my nephew or my uncle was detained for just protesting, but then the Iranian government comes out and says no, they were actually a spy. Which who do you believe? I would definitely believe the Iranian people more than the government because they have lied time and time again. Um, and like I said, it goes back to your first question. The most important thing to this regime is its own existence. So even to a point where Israel attacking and bombing civilian sites and killing Iranian people is to the benefit of the Islamic Republic, because this is another way for them to continue to hold on to power because they are stretched very thin. They have a finite number of missiles that they can use against Israel. It's going to come to a point where they're going to run out, and they don't have someone the way Israel has America. So I highly doubt that China or Russia is going to supply them with more missiles. So they have to take that into consideration. They also have to take into consideration that this is the weakest they've been. Going back to your previous point about how, Hezbollah and Hamas and even the Houthis are not as strong as they used to be, and they're not willing to help like they could have been, 2, 3, 4 years ago. And on top of that, the, domestic, uprisings ever since the death of Masa Amini and the women's life freedom movement, Iran, the government in Iran domestically has always been under threat since then. And this regime has to play it very safe, very carefully, to the point where they don't want to overextend themselves regionally against Israel to then expose themselves to a weaker type of front when it comes to these domestic uprisings. So again, it still comes down to their own self-preservation, being able to remain in power.
Mm.
So Israel, in a way, is kind of helping this regime stay in power by bombing the people in Iran, because those are the same people that could uprise and protest, but now they're all evacuating Tehran and they're leaving the country, which is playing into the strengths of the Islamic Republic still being able to stay in power.
Yeah. Reza, we saw Israel strike on the 61st day. We saw America give Iran 60 sort of days. Do you think Benjamin Netanyahu always had it in mind that he spoke in advance to Donald Trump, listen, if this timeline elapses, we're going to move? And Trump said to basically to Benjamin Netanyahu, yes, okay, if we give him the 60 days and if you want sort of to take some sort of action, obviously he didn't expect the action they did, but Benjamin Netanyahu felt he got some sort of assurances from Trump that he could do something. Do you think on the other side of things that Benjamin Netanyahu feels that he only needs approval or certain approval from America, that there's a complete disregard from Israel and their leadership towards the European Union, towards the United Nations, in terms of that the relationship is sort of so strained at the moment that they're only listening to America in terms of America's sort of approval, that any condemnation coming from Europe, from France, Germany, Britain, Ireland, places like this, it's going in one ear out the other ear as far as Israel are concerned?
Yeah, unfortunately, I do agree with that assessment of yours. But at the same time, we have to look at what the German chancellor said just a few days ago after the G7 summit, where he was saying that Israel is doing the world's dirty work, and even you know France to a certain extent. Most European countries um, do side with Israel, not to the furthest extent that the United States does. We have to keep in mind, for example, like Iran just hit a hospital in Israel, but if we take a look at that location inside Israel, that hospital is almost neighboring a somewhat of a military compound inside Israel, very similar to the way to the way Hamas operated inside Gaza. They had hospitals close to military compounds. So Israel and Hamas in that regard are very similar. And we saw Israel bomb hospitals in Gaza, and we didn't hear much condemnation about that, because Israel would couch it in the phrase of Hamas would use hospitals as their own military sites, and you know use civilians as human shields. And now Iran has done that, and a bit of hypocrisy, double standard is starting to show itself in a much brighter light. And when it comes to the way the EU and Europe more broadly, including England is concerned, or Britain is concerned, the way they approach this is going to be very telling, because on the one hand, we can't have this debate where we say European countries try to persuade or aid or advise Israel to do certain strategies in a certain way, but Netanyahu doesn't seem to listen. Um, we can't make that complaint, but then at the same time not hold Israel accountable to these double standards or to these hypocrisies. And I think that type of um, um, you know what's the right word? It's this um, detachment, if you will, when it comes to the way it's approached with Israel, to where now, like you said, it's in one ear out the other, and they're siding more, with Washington and Trump, in particular Trump, because he has supported Israel in ways that no U.S. president has in the past, particularly moving the U.S. embassy the way he did and acknowledging, the capital of Israel. Um, and really not even interested in a two-state solution, which all falls into the policies of Netanyahu's government, which is a far right government, and we all know that he's been going to court for certain types of crimes, and once his prime ministership is over, he's more or less essentially going to prison. So he's trying to prolong that, and the U.S. is more or less helping him stay in power through these types of conflicts. So I think in order for Europe, or more specifically the EU, to uh, stay in the ear of Netanyahu, to be able to advise him or consult him, or being able to persuade him to de-escalate this conflict. The first most important step, I think, is what I mentioned earlier, being able to have that meeting with their counterparts from Iran in the next couple of days, I think. More specifically with Iran's foreign minister Abbas Araghchi, and taking that conversation, taking that type of high level talk and information, taking it to Israel and having a conversation with them as well, being a part of those types of talks, to show that, because clearly many European countries, like I said, Germany, France, support Israel more than they support Iran. Rightly or wrongly, that's a whole other conversation. But having that level of support, and being able to use that level of support to try to persuade Israel to de-escalate, could be seen as a good first step for the EU to kind of get back into a better relationship with Netanyahu, where it's not in one ear and out the other, so to speak, like you said.
Reza, we saw in the past, history will tell us in the Middle East, in terms of certain countries, we don't have to go back too far. When you cut off the head of a snake, sometimes a bigger snake can come along and even more worse. And we've seen that in terms of Afghanistan is a classic example,
Mhm.
where America thought by initiating regime change in Afghanistan that they would bring on a better sort of solution. And the solution got way worse than they ever imagined in terms of before. Eventually, Afghanistan, maybe we're talking as some bit of security now these days, but to compare to what it was, but it took a long, long, long
Yeah.
time. Is there any sort of fear in Iran that there is something waiting in the wings, that the Americans may view the current regime, they might have hostility towards the current regime, but there could be something waiting in the wings that could be even worse in their eyes, that could be to step in?
Right. Yeah. So it's that's a great question. It's a lot to unpack there too. But to put it simply, waiting in the wings, I think, not not so much. Iran, like I said, is a very large country, 90 million population, and ethnically there are a lot of different ethnic Iranians. It's not just Persians. There's Kurds and Turks, and even Arabs, and so there could be that element of quote unquote waiting in the wings as far as the Kurds are concerned, but I highly doubt it. The one key faction that I see uh, filling that void, if it does exist, if, like you said, if the head of the snake is cut off, so to speak, if the supreme leader Ali Khamenei is assassinated, but he's also 86 years old, so he's not going to be with us that much longer anyways. And so the the regime has already began it, for the past couple of years now, their plans uh, for their government post, Khamenei. So that's already in the works anyway. So whether he gets assassinated tomorrow or whether he dies of natural causes in a few years, um, the regime is ready for that. Um, but what kind of speaks to me at a much higher volume than who is Khamenei's successor is who's going to run the government overall. Because we see the IRGC, which is the military essentially of the revolution of this regime. Iran does have a more traditional army or military, but they also have the IRGC, which is another military, another army that is more devoted to the revolution, to this regime, to this supreme leader. And if if a power vacuum, exists as a result of this conflict, I see the IRGC stepping in and essentially taking over, similar to what we see in Egypt. The way the kind of government that Egypt has, where the highest ranking general becomes the president, and it's essentially a dictatorship until the next general, steps up. Um, so I do see that kind of waiting in the wings, so to speak, from the IRGC, because when the revolution happened, the mullahs took over and they were the face of the regime. And those that fought in the 8-year war between Iran and Iraq were too busy fighting a war to be able to find the opportunity to allocate a portion of that regime for themselves, to find a seat at the table, to be able to run for office, to be a part of anything that had to do with the government. They were too busy fighting the war. And then once the war was over, all the seats at the table were filled, so to speak, and they were kind of left out. So they found a way to get into power through the side door, which for them was the economy, taking control of all real entry points into the Iran when it comes to import export goods, even the black market. They have capitalized on the black market and sanctions, real estate, businesses. Um, Really, the IRGC, for all intents and purposes, runs the country, controls the country. Khamenei may be the face of it. Certain mullahs may be considered, like the face of the regime. But really behind the scenes, uh, I believe the IRGC is in vast control. But Khamenei plays that balancing act where he doesn't want them to have complete control, so he has a really strong, close-knit relationship with them. So, like you said, if the head of the snake is cut off, um, I'm not really concerned about who's going to be his, successor. More so, what will the IRGC do? And of course, at the same time, we've seen those strikes that Israel has done on Iran, where they have, killed a vast number of high-ranking military officials within the IRGC. But again, similar to the way most European countries and specifically America, how they have universities ran by their militaries, Iran has the same type of infrastructure. They have universities ran by the IRGC. So there are youth being raised into this doctrine, going through the system as teenagers and in their 20s and 30s. So even with these high-ranking officials being killed by this conflict, there are a plethora of new generations of IRGC members just rising up in the ranks. And it's not like Hezbollah, or yeah, specifically Hezbollah, where Israel's intelligence agency Mossad infiltrated Hezbollah. So while Israel was assassinating high-ranking officials in Hezbollah, when all those lower-ranking officials were rising up, some of them were moles, were double agents, were part of Mossad. I have yet to see those types of intelligence or conversations being spoken in regards to the IRGC, because it's such a tightly knit, close knit type of organization, so to speak, that to me seems to be the most pressing and um, worrisome type of scenario when it comes to, like you said, cutting off the head of the snake.
Yeah. Reza Khanzadeh, a final question to you now for the final minute or so. Look ahead now in terms of the whole issue and the concept of public diplomacy. Is there a sort of a feeling between the international community and the feeling that expert that at the end of the day, come say August the 1st, month's time, maybe that we might be looking on that public diplomacy will win out? Or are we going to have this sort of what we call this sort of states checkmate sort of situation that we have in the moment, that where it's going to be continuous, where continuous sort of strike back, and America just holding and holding, waiting to see and intervene? Or could we have a more quicker, sorry, will public diplomacy offer a more quicker solution?
Right. Yeah, that's also another great question. It's one of those crystal ball questions that we just don't know, obviously, because um, conditions on the ground there between Israel and Iran are changing by the hour, essentially. And now with President Trump saying he's going to wait, or within 2 weeks, he's going to decide whether or not to join Israel, in this attack. Because even with President Trump, following all of his speeches in the past 2 days, within 12 hours, he made a comment where he said, um, uh, talking is over, no more negotiations. They need to, surrender and give up, and then we'll go in and blow up all their nuclear sites. And then a couple hours later, he said the door is still open to talking. So who really knows what kind of strategy Trump has in place? And to a certain extent, it's almost not that important what type of strategy he has, because he seems to be more interested in what Netanyahu wants and what Netanyahu believes in. Because even his own intelligence agency has said, like I said before, Iran, according to President Trump's own intelligence agencies, Iran is 3 years away from having a nuclear bomb. And he doesn't believe them. He believes what Israel is telling him, which is it's a much shorter window. It's not 3 years. It's weeks, months, maybe 1 year. So as far as that diplomatic off ramp and being able to defuse this situation through diplomacy rather than capitulation or surrender. In modern history, almost all conflicts end through diplomacy. Um, Now, how long it takes to get to that point, that's the strategy that we're looking at now. If it's going to be 2 weeks, I see that as um, a 50-50 chance, and it depends on what happens with uh, Iran's foreign minister going to Europe, going to Geneva, meeting with his European counterparts, how that meeting goes, um, and then what kind of information gets relayed back to Israel, back to Trump from that conversation. Because, like I said before, the number of missiles Iran is sending into Israel has been decreasing by the day, which means Iran is seeing, and of course, as the news has been reporting, the United States is sending its military to surround Iran. All the US military bases around Iran have been fortified, and there's been an increase in aircraft carriers and bombers and jets, and all types of military equipment has been sent over there. And even though Iran may talk a big game, even though they might say we have all these missiles and if you attack us, we'll attack you, that might be true in a short-term strategy, but like I said, there's a finite number of missiles Iran has, and they know this, and they're calculating a more longer-term strategy to where their own existence is not jeopardized, where they can still hold on to power. So because of that, I feel like the most important key actor in this moment right now is Netanyahu. And he has this messianic type of approach now where he feels like this is his calling. This is his life's calling after 30 plus years of saying we need to attack Iran. We need to stop Iran's nuclear program. He finally has the opportunity to do it. And I don't think he's going to give it up that easily. Iran seems to be willing to want to find an off ramp. The US and, specifically Trump also wants to find that off ramp through diplomacy, but Netanyahu does not seem to be interested in that. And convincing him, I think that's where the EU can really play a strong part. They can team up with Trump, especially with Trump and all these talks about tariffs on the European Union and on Europe. They can leverage that type of, conversation where it's a two-track system, essentially you scratch our back, we'll scratch yours, a win-win for Europe and for America and also for the world, to be honest, because the last thing we need is for this conflict to escalate even more than it already has. So that could be a great entryway for the European Union, for Europe, to be on the side of Israel and the United States, to convince Netanyahu to also de-escalate and try to find an off-ramp.
Reza Khanzadeh, we have to leave it there. Time has caught up with us this evening. Thanks a million for joining us on our Global Politics show to review global international affairs that obviously affect us here in Ireland and the European Union as well. Reza Khanzadeh, a Middle East expert based in America, all things on Iran analyst and a senior foreign policy advisor. From me, Jim Conlan, to you, Reza Khanzadeh, stay safe, take care, and God bless her.
Thank you so much.